Severe weather impacts us on a day-to-day basis across the United States, many months out of the spring and summer. Here in Illinois, we have a typical tornado season from April through June, but severe weather can happen at any point in time during the year. I know many of you are afraid of severe weather, and that is why I started the Storm Anxiety Work Group. My name is Danny Neal. Please continue on my journey as we get into a stage of healing and talk to different experts and mental health professionals. Scenes like the one shown here in this video may give someone massive anxiety about severe weather. Join me with Zachary DeVore, licensed therapist with Owens and Associate Counseling, as we go through the before, during, and after severe weather anxiety and how to cope with it. This is episode 1 of a several-part series in coping with severe weather anxiety, from licensed professionals to storm chasers to other meteorologists, and the best ways to protect yourself and your family.
Hi, so my name is Zachary DeVore. I am one of the therapists with Owens and Associates Counseling. We've got offices in Collinsville, St. Charles, Schaumburg, and Lake in the Hills. I work predominantly out of the St. Charles office, but also I have a day in Schaumburg and I have a day in Lake in the Hills. And a part of why I'm really excited to be kind of partnering and working with Danny addressing weather-related anxiety is that's something that I've dealt with since I was a kid. When I was growing up, I lived in Texas, and there was a tornado where I was actually stuck in the freezer of a fast food restaurant for most of a night until it was safe to leave. And ever since then, storms have been something that I've never been comfortable with. And then, of course, I moved to the Midwest and my parents settled on Plainfield. So I got to hear about that tornado every single year, which didn't help the storm anxiety at all. But I know there's a lot of people who struggle with storms. And so I want to see how we can help, make some of that better, give some tools, give some helpful advice, and then always, if you are really struggling with something, mental health related, contact a therapist, contact a mental health professional, whether it's us or someplace more local to you. We're here to help, and we are an amazing resource to help you stay on top of that.
Thank you, Zach, for that awesome story about your experiences, and also when you are able to help people now with severe weather and anxiety and everything you're doing for your group. So we're excited to have you aboard here and helping these people out. We have a lot of people that are kind of anxious about severe weather, whether it's before, during, and after. But I guess my first question to you would be, leading up to the day of a storm, there's several sources online that people check, could cause some anxiety. What do you suggest people do in the days before a storm?
Yeah, so the important thing to understand about anxiety is a natural emotion that we feel when we don't feel safe. It's tied to fear. Now, yes, anxiety is also the name of a disorder, so it tends to get a bad rap, but really what it boils down to is it is our body's way of kind of letting us know we don't feel safe about the situation. So if there's something going on that's going to trigger anxiety, what we want to do is identify, what is it about this situation that makes me feel unsafe? And what are things that I can do that are going to make me feel safer, as well as not going to impact my overall quality of life, my ability to work, my ability to function with my family, those types of things. So if it's a day where we're supposed to get some bad weather, a good thing to do is identify, okay, what is it about what's going to happen that's making me feel unsafe? What are some things that I could do? So maybe, planning on trying to be home when the storms hit, have the basement ready, things like that, as long as they're not going to be, negatively impacting your life. If you find what you're doing that's helping you feel safe negatively is impacting your life, like, it's causing friction within your household, you're having to call off work, that's something you might want to, seek out, talk to a therapist about, because we might need to work on a more customized plan that's more specific for you to help better address that. But once you've done that, focus on, some good coping techniques. So breathing exercises are good, because anxiety and fear is tied into that fight, flight, or freeze response. So it's that rush of adrenaline that we get when we feel like we're in danger. And when that happens, our muscles get tense, our heart rate goes up, and our breathing increases. Well, most of us can't automatically control our muscle tension or our heart rate. Some people can. It's kind of creepy. But if you can, great, awesome. But what we all can do is we can control our breathing. So you've heard that, expression before, take deep breaths. Deep has nothing to do with it. What you want to do is slow, relaxed, even breathing. And you want to do this early. As soon as you start feeling that little bit of anxiety, start working on some of those breathing exercises. Start doing some of those calming things. That's going to help your body regulate, because your brain's going to look at your breathing and go, oh, wait, our breathing is calm, our breathing is slow, we must not be in danger. If you wait until you're on the verge of a panic attack where the anxiety is really bad, it's not going to work. That's where a lot of people will say, I've tried breathing, it didn't work. Most times in my experience, it's because they started doing that too late. They were kind of past that point of no return, so to speak, and so it's not working. So those are the biggest things you can do early on to kind of help better prepare yourself when you know something is going to be triggering for your anxiety.
Good answer, Zach. I appreciate that, and hopefully people can take that to heart. And it's not a one-step fix-all process here. It's going to be working towards it, especially if you've years and years of suffering. So, from the science side of things, talking about beforehand during severe weather, one of the things I advocate is finding the right resources. If you're finding people that are using hype words and big bold graphics and make it seem like the end of the world is happening every single event, I would suggest not following that page, even if the guy is your neighbor and you're best friends with him. But if his techniques or whatever is not working, it's only going to trigger your anxiety more, which is sometimes when people come to me, they always post me the same links over and over again. Well, this person said this and it shows this, and it's to the point where I have to ask, if this person is triggering you, why are you still following them? Is there any insight in that from the mental health side of why people choose to do that over and over again? Are they just trying to get their own dose of bad news, what the worst case scenario is, and try to cope with that? Or is there something else going on?
Yeah, so that's a phenomenon that I'm very familiar with. It's something I saw a lot, especially with COVID, in the early days of lockdown, where people were, following the news 24/7, and almost everybody was saying, well, it's causing me more anxiety. And so the importance of finding a good resource is critical. And like you mentioned, avoiding things like hype words. In my general experience, and, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, but I think you won't, is that the better the source is, the less hype words they're going to use. If you're looking at something that's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever, that's a lot of hyperbole. That's not going to be a good source. What you want is something that's breaking it down and going, here's the facts, here's what we know, here's what could happen, here's what seems most likely. And sometimes why I think people gravitate towards, the more overblown, overdramatic sources is a sense of control. If I'm reading a source that says, oh my gosh, this is going to be the worst thing ever, and that's what I prepare myself for, then I have that sense of control of, if it's less than that, I'm okay. But the problem is that it doesn't usually pan out that way. What tends to happen is we get so worked up, we get so overwhelmed, and then it doesn't, maybe pan out the way we thought it would. Maybe the big storm died out before it hit us or missed us entirely, and you went, oh, well, I did all this prep work and nothing happened. And that can cause some internal shame. That can cause potential conflicts with loved ones where they might be like, see, you were so worried and nothing happened. And I get it. We all want a sense of control in our lives, but we want to make sure that what we're using, what we're doing to give that control is actually giving control, not the illusion of control.
Excellent response. I appreciate that, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. I know there's several cases that I've dealt with lately where people have basically taken the flight method and tried to drive, fly, train, whatever, away from the fear. Sometimes storms hit their house, sometimes they didn't. How would you address that idea of needing to leave to feel safest? Is there any way to address that, or is that, like you said before, is that just your natural response? Is there any way to even work on that?
So with anything, there's always a way to work on it. I'm a firm believer that anything that we're struggling with, we can work on it. Sometimes that means it goes away entirely. Sometimes it doesn't. Especially if you've had a traumatic experience with a storm, I can't, and nobody can promise that trauma is going to go away, but you can get to a point where it's more manageable. An example I like to use was a couple of years ago, I got rear-ended by a semi. Immediately after that accident, I did not want to be anywhere near a semi on the road, much less have one behind me. That was a really upsetting circumstance. Now, I can have semis behind me, I can be around them. I still don't 100% like it, but it's not as bad as it was. And sometimes that's what we're looking for. So with that, my biggest question is, why is it that, running or going to those extremes of, driving, flying, taking a train to someplace else, why is that what makes you feel safe? So that's going to be personalized for, every individual, but understanding why that's helping you feel safe is going to be really beneficial for us to know how to better come up with an alternative, replacement behavior. Sometimes when I talk about anxiety, I use an example of, it's like if I bring 3 people to a haunted house attraction and each of them starts panicking as we're in line. I might assume, oh, they're panicking for this reason and try to help, but it may not help. Why? Because one person, they might be anxious over the content of the haunted house. One person might be claustrophobic and is worried about being in cramped spaces, and the other person may not like crowds. Well, there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach that's going to help each of those 3 people. So we need to understand why that is what's making us feel safe. and what feels threatening to better identify what we can do. And that's something you can attempt to do on your own. But if you're struggling with that, that would be a great topic to bring up in therapy. Just talk with your therapist. Hey, when this is going on, this is what I do, and I'm trying to understand why, because my guess is that for people who are doing that, that's where it is impacting their lives, their financial livelihood, work, relationships. It's probably putting a strain on those things. And with anything, your therapist is there to support you, help you, and if you're not feeling that, that's okay. It doesn't mean they're a bad therapist. It just might mean that they're not a good fit for you, and you can find one that is a better fit. And you can also reach out to other professionals to see if they would be open to helping you with this. I get emails all the time that say, hey, Zach, here's what's going on. Here's what I'm dealing with. Is this something you think you can help with? So don't be afraid to reach out and ask those direct questions and say, this is what's going on. This is what I need help with. Can you help me?
No, perfect. Like I said, we see that a lot when we're dealing with storm anxiety. A lot of people just want to avoid it altogether, try to drive as far away from the storm or the potential from storms as possible. But with weather, we know it's unpredictable. We do our best, but some things happen the way they should, some things don't. So my fear is, people are driving away from the storm, but they may be driving into the path of another storm. Or, just outside the financial and relationship strain, they may be doing more disservice than a service to themselves. So that is one of the big issues that I was hoping this group and the advice that we give here can help with, because I want people to feel empowered by knowledge. And I know sometimes it goes deeper than just what you know and what you don't know, which is why I wanted to do this with the mental health side. At what point do you say the fear, the flight, the freeze becomes unhealthy, other than, if it's you're not going to work or you're shutting down and not talking to anybody? But is there signs that are prevalent for people to know, okay, maybe this is a bigger thing than our rational fear?
Yeah, and this is something that I talk about with clients at times, is before I even look at symptomology, what the DSM says are the criteria for a specific disorder, there are two things that I fundamentally look for. Is what's going on causing you physical, emotional, or mental harm? Or is it getting in the way of functioning in terms of healthy functioning, in terms of work, relationships, things like that? So if you're doing these things and you say, well, this is helping me, but it doesn't feel like it's helping you, it actually feels like it's hurting you, or you're doing these things, but you're getting into fights with a family member or your significant other, on a regular basis, if you're going into debt because you're planning these trips and all of these sorts of things, those are, where I would say that it's not healthy, because it's fundamentally, it's getting in the way of your ability to fully live and fully enjoy your life. And sometimes we may need to also take into consideration the opinions of people around us. Sometimes when a person is doing something, they may not realize the negative impact that it's having on them. There's a lot of times people are doing things that are damaging or self-destructive, but if you talk to them about it, they'll say, no, I'm fine, like this is good. But everyone else around them goes, no, this is an issue. So also, if you've got people in your life that are saying, hey, I understand this is a fear, I understand this is a concern, but I'm worried about you and I'm worried about what you're doing and how you're handling this. That's a good sign to maybe take a deeper look at it. And you can always set up an initial consult, explain things to, like a therapist, and sometimes we'll go, no, that seems reasonable, and I think the people in your life are being overly critical, because I know that exists, especially with weather anxiety. People will do things that are perfectly reasonable, but their significant other, their family members, the guy who likes to go out, or girl who likes to go out and stand on the porch and watch the tornadoes, they're like, you go into the basement is unreasonable. Well, no, that's not unreasonable. So you have to take some of it into consideration, but really that's kind of the biggest thing is it harmful, and is it getting in the way of you being able to live your life? And check in with loved ones, check in with people close to you, and see what they think as well. They might see things a little bit differently than you, and if you're getting that feedback, talk to someone.
All right, thanks, Zach, for going over the do's and don'ts and some of the helpful advice you give to people before a storm. Now we're going to move into what happens during a storm. You've prepared, you've stayed at home, you're doing everything the right way. Now the storm's approaching, the weather radio goes off, your phone's going off, the sirens start going off for a tornado warning or whatever advisory it is. Now we have to act. And some people I've noticed are very proactive with trying to get their family downstairs into the closet hours before the storm hits. And then some people, as you say, freeze and forget everything they ever knew about storms, and they don't know what to do next. The first thing I want to address is, what do we do, or how do we communicate with our significant others or anybody in the household that just isn't taking it as seriously as you are? And for example, let's just say you're a mother, you have two very small children that you need to get into shelter, and your significant other, whomever it is just sitting on the couch, basically waving their hand at you, saying, you're just overreacting, nothing's going to happen. What do you do in the heat of the moment at that point, and what conversations need to be had afterwards for a healthy relationship to keep going? Because I can imagine that's probably going to cause some friction afterwards, especially if nothing happens, as you said earlier, that the two heads are going to be butting together saying, well, you're irrational for thinking that way, and then the other person will say, well, you just don't understand how I think. So what are some of the advice and tips that you have?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say it's, not so much the conversation during. I mean, there's a way to handle a conversation during, but in that moment, one of you is in fight or flight mode, the other person isn't. When it feels like you are in danger, our brains aren't thinking in the most logical, rational, I'm going to explain this kind of way. We're focused on survival. But the biggest thing when you are trying to convey something to your partner, and this goes for the partner as well, if you have a significant other, a family member who's anxious about storms and you're not, is recognizing that it's not about getting the other person to agree with you and think the way that you do. Most relationship conflicts are unsolvable in the sense that there is a right approach and a wrong approach. It's more so that I've got my way that I do it, you have your way that you do it and see it, and how do we understand each other? So the important thing is explaining why. When we explain why we feel this way, why something's important to us, it tends to matter more to the other person. Just saying, I don't like storms, or I'm afraid of storms, yeah, in a perfect world, our partners are going to respond well to that. But that's not usually how it works. But if I say, hey, when I was a little kid, I was in a tornado and it was really terrifying for me. And so when the sky gets that same color and I hear the tornado sirens, I flash back to that moment when I was a little kid, and going and sitting in the basement helps me feel okay. I think a lot of times our partners are going to hear that and go, oh, that makes sense. Okay. They might not join us in the basement, but that's okay. Again, the goal is not we need to be on the exact same page. You need to feel the way I do about this. It's understanding how each of you sees it. And then if something goes wrong in that process, you talk about it later. Again, not from a blaming standpoint of why did you do this? You did this wrong. But hey, here's what my experience was. Here's what worked for me. Here's what didn't. Here's how I felt and why. And then getting that from the other person and figuring out, okay, what will we do next time to avoid this happening again? Because that's the key thing. If this is a constant argument, disagreement, area of friction in a relationship, our ultimate goal is we don't want to keep having the same discussion over and over again. Nobody likes that. So let's figure out how we best move forward through it. And that's something that is done with respecting the other person. I can respect that you might not be afraid of storms and have a different reaction. So I need you to respect that I am, and that in this moment, we just have different needs. And we need to figure out how best to manage those things together as a team. Ultimately, that's the goal of any relationship, working together as a team, as a partnership. If you're thinking, well, it's me versus you, you've both lost at that point.
Sure. No, that's great advice, and I know a lot of people deal with that. And they may not be open about it, but hearing that may, spark people to have a better understanding of one another. I could see it from both sides. Personal experience, I was deathly afraid of storms up until the age of 12 or 13. So there's nothing you could tell me in that point in time where it would make me feel better, feel safer, feel anything, even if the sky was gray and cloudy. No storms. It could be the winter time. It did not matter, just because gray and cloudy always meant bad weather was coming, even though we know now it doesn't. But in my mind at that point as a child, it was just that rationalization I had that if it wasn't crystal clear outside, a bad storm was coming. For me, my medicine was education, learning about severe weather, learning about what causes storms, learning about what ingredients I need to worry about. And that's kind of the things that I convey to people from the science fact-finding side is, learn about what type of weather occurs in your area and then narrow it down to how many days per year it occurs. And then, we can just keep going down and down until your risk at 1 in 3 million, kind of. That you're going to be impacted by something like that. And, I hate to defer fear onto another topic, because a lot of people are like, well, the chances of you getting hit by a tornado are so low that you have a better chance of getting in a car accident. It's like, well, now I'm going to make someone afraid to get in a car. You don't want to do that either. But, when you're speaking the weather is, as you said earlier, is something we cannot control. And a lot of it is a control issue. And I have the same way. I have I guess you'd call it a fear of flying. I do not like to fly. But I think I've narrowed it down only because I'm not in control of that airplane. I'm leaving my existence, my everything, into somebody else's hands. And that's uncomfortable for me. And I've been trying to do better with it. I don't fly that often, but when I do, literally leading up to my flight 2-3 weeks in advance, I'm watching videos online about turbulence. I'm watching how air traffic controllers and pilots communicate with each other. I'm learning about what happens. So if something happens, I can in my mind say, okay, that was just turbulence. The plane's not going to fall out of the sky, that kind of thing. So some of the ways that I cope and some of the ways I'm sure other people may do it with severe weather. Um, but now I see it from the other side where, I hate to joke around, but say, blue skies make me scared now because it's so boring. There's nothing to do out there. I don't track any storms. I can't see a tornado. But, I obviously don't convey that to the people that I'm following because I don't want to trigger them and make it seem like I'm unsympathetic to their needs. But, me personally, like that, it's just the complete opposite. And I don't expect everyone or anybody really to get to that level of obsession with the weather that I have. But, what I've been trying to advocate to people is I just want to give you enough knowledge to be able to look at the radar, look at basic weather conditions, and know that today is a day I probably need to pay attention to the weather. And then from there, break it down. Okay, I'm paying attention to the weather, but these storms aren't going to be too bad. They're just going to be, a little bit of small hail and some lightning. I can live with that. Versus the ones that are like, okay, this is going to have a big tornado. So that is what I've been trying to do on my side, the physical science side of meteorology and storm anxiety. And like I said, bringing you guys in and you specifically in to help with the emotional / mental health side is huge. And like I said, I think one of the biggest obstacles is getting your significant other or whomever in your life to buy into that fear that they may feel is irrational. And as you said, it's more of a understanding versus a he said, she said, I'm right, you're wrong. So I appreciate you taking the time to explain that, and hopefully that helps some people out. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think so. Kind of piggybacking off of what you said is emotions aren't rational. Emotions don't care about logic. I've always made the joke that if I ever went into business for myself, which I'm not going to do, but if I did, I was going to put that on a business card, that if emotions were rational, I'd be out of a job because they aren't. And so, like, to your point about flying, recognizing, okay, this is something where I'm not in control. Sometimes having more knowledge about a subject gives us that sense of control, that idea of, okay, I have a little bit more control because I know more about what's going on. But that's not a cure-all. That doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So sometimes in those situations, what I look for is, okay, if you're in a situation where you don't have that feeling of control, focus on and think about, what do I have control over? And maybe give yourself some things to do, to bring with you, whatever the case may be. And you can do this with storms. You yourself can do it with flying, but it's what's going to give me a sense of control in that moment where my, emotional side of my brain is screaming, I need to have control over something. Find what that is, find what works, find what gives you that sense of control. That might be a good way of helping. And I think for significant others, family members, that can be sometimes that barrier is they'll go, well, I know because I have this knowledge, I have this information, that there's nothing to worry about. So why won't you just listen to me? Why won't you just listen to my facts and that be okay? Because the facts aren't giving that person that sense of control. We need to figure out what that person is going to need, and then address that. That's going to be the better way to kind of handle that and move through it.
Absolutely. So I know we've been talking a lot about adults here. I don't want to get too deep into it because it's a whole nother can of worms on its own. But how do you explain this to a child? How do you explain something that you can't really break down from a fact-finding sense because they, number one, won't understand it, or number two, don't have a knowledge base about it to begin with? But you have a 6-year-old, 7-year-old that is afraid of thunder and lightning, let alone tornadoes or anything severe weather. But how do you convey a child's anxiety, a child's feeling of nervousness around the weather? Is there anything that you can help parents with and try to help them through it?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I always say when it comes to kids is be age appropriate, but be as honest as possible. Because, and this is true for kids, it's true for adults, by the time I feel comfortable asking about something, because for anyone, asking about things that we're afraid of and things we're uncomfortable with is in and of itself uncomfortable, which means I'm going to sit with that question for a while before I ever bring it to somebody else, which means I've thought about this. I've got theories, I've got ideas all swirling around in my brain. Being honest, but age appropriate is going to help cut through that. If you're looking at something like weather and being like, "Well, man, I don't know how to, best convey this, best explain this." Research into, some of the older like shows that were for kids. I'm pretty sure like Magic School Bus
Oh
did
yeah.
an episode about
Yep.
weather and storms, and Bill Nye and things like that. And those are ones that I would trust because they did a very good job growing up of being like, hey, here's what the facts are, but in a way that's broadly age appropriate for kids. So that might be something of, hey, let's sit down and watch this together. And if you have more questions, you can ask, and I'll try to answer as best I can. The idea, though, is you don't want to say something that's going to cause more fear. You don't want to leave it seem like it's ambiguous or something like that. You want to really work on answering the question that they have as best and honestly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a big thing for me. My parents did the best they could, my grandparents, my teachers. Um, I've heard some people in the past tell me experiences where um, they would use it against kids. And I never agreed with that, and I hated that. But
Mhm.
oh, you're not behaving. The sky's getting angry with you, kind of thing. And I always cringe when I hear those stories. It's like I can't imagine what that could have done to somebody who was as fragile like I was with the weather. It's like now you're sitting there like I didn't even do anything. I'm being good, and this bad storm's happening. So, that would be something. So I guess we'll segue into that. What are some of the don'ts you don't want to tell even an adult, not even a kid, but some of the things you don't want to do to diminish them? Obviously, the obvious ones are, oh, you're crazy. Oh, nothing bad's going to happen. You're overreacting. But what are some of the things that you may not realize you're doing that are invalidating those people's concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right along in what you said, invalidated. A lot of times in my experience, people think to validate somebody means that you have to agree with them. Validation just means I understand and I respect your point of view on this. So anything that conveys you either don't understand or you don't respect their personal experience. So that could be the you're crazy, in those extremes, but even simple things of like, hey, there's a chance that it's not going to hit. You shouldn't worry about it because you think you're being helpful. The person hearing that hears, they're telling me I shouldn't be afraid about this. I guess I'm stupid for being afraid. I shouldn't be afraid. So now they're feeling that the way that they feel. Nobody likes feeling afraid. They're not choosing this. But now they're feeling bad about it because you've just said, hey, come on, there's no need to worry.
Yeah, that's.
So
Sorry,
you're
I didn't mean to cut you
you're
off.
you're invalidating them by basically saying the emotion you're feeling is wrong. And that's not something that we want to do. And obviously, some of those examples that you gave with kids, no, that's not okay, and you have to be careful of, well, because a lot of people say, well, my parents did it and I was fine. Okay, but you're not your parents and your kid isn't you. You don't know how your kid's going to respond to that, and it could be damaging. if we have options and there's ways that are not damaging and there's ways that could be damaging, I'm going to go with the ways that aren't damaging, not the ways that could be. That's not a gamble I personally want to take. The other thing that you want to be careful of that I know a lot of parents will do is that idea of, hey, it's storming. I'm going to take my kid who's afraid of storms and make them sit out in the storm with me and watch it, and they'll see that it's fine. So this does have some basis in psychological theory. When we're trying to work on a phobia, there's two approaches. There's systematic desensitization, which is basically where you expose somebody to what they're afraid of, but you start small. Like if a person's afraid of spiders, you have a picture of a spider in the room. It makes them a little uncomfortable, but it's not too bad. And then you graduate to a video of a spider playing, and so on and so forth until they eventually get used to it. The other method is what's known as flooding. And that's where you take somebody who's afraid of something and you basically shove them into what their fear is in the idea, well, they'll see that it's fine and they'll get better. It can work. There's a lot of risks to it. So if you've ever had a panic attack, I worked in an ER for a little bit. People came in with panic attacks because it can legitimately feel like a heart attack. So if you do that with somebody, especially a kid, they're not seeing I was fine. They're seeing I did this, and then it felt like I was having a heart attack. That's now going to associate that chest tightness, the shortness of breath, all the negatives of a panic attack with the storm. You've now made that fear worse. Or, heaven forbid, lightning strikes the tree in your front yard and it crashes into the house, or a tornado hits. There's a lot of dangers and risks with flooding, and that's why a lot of therapists won't do it. And if we do it as a very last resort, and we try to make sure it is in as controlled of an environment as possible. Weather and storms, by their very nature, aren't controllable scenarios. So I get it. I mean, I know that there's the best of intentions there, but there's a big risk associated with it. It could work. It could make that fear a lot worse. And so there's other better options that we want to explore and look at first before we get to that point.
Wonderful. No, I appreciate that that analyzation. And I mean, it's relevant to me because, or somebody like me who does social media weather, and you get a million questions, and you're trying to help people, and you're trying to have the best possible advice, the best possible sympathy that you can in that sense. And like I said, with me personally, I'm very blunt fact-finding to people, and what you just said kind of resonated a little bit with me. It's how many times have I tried to be helpful to someone, but in turn really did invalidate their feeling. Try not to do that, but somebody's like, I don't feel safe in my home. I don't feel comfortable living where I live. I don't feel comfortable going to work today. And me trying to, talk about the life, say, you know what, the odds of something happening are very low. Live your life, but know what to do when things don't turn out the way that you expect them to. Like I said, to me, I feel like, okay, that's good, sound validation, advice with a little bit of fact-finding, but to them it may be, this guy just doesn't understand. I don't understand. So I guess to somebody who gives advice publicly like I do, is there anything that you could say I do wrong, right? And I know you probably don't see what I do on a day-to-day basis, but is there some tips you can give to people like me in the public eye that could help people without feeling like you're alienating them into their own little island that they're just different than everyone else?
Yeah. So I think for something like that, somebody comments on the Facebook page like, hey, I don't feel safe going into work today. You're looking at what you see and what you know because you have the training, you have the knowledge, you have the experience to go, yeah, there's not much of a need for that worry. It can be something very simple as, hey, I hear that. I hear that you don't feel safe going into work. And this might be something that you might not have time to do. Not everybody has the time to do this. And to be bluntly honest, you are not their therapist. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite your job to handle all of these things as perfectly. But if you do have that ability where you're going to be, interacting, you could ask something like, would having, the knowledge of what I'm seeing and what's most likely to happen help you feel safer? A simple question. They might say no, in which case you could, lay out all the facts, all the data, and be perfectly accurate. That's not going to help them. And so then that might be a case with, hey, I'm sorry, for that. If there is anything that I can do in my respect, as somebody who has the science, let me know. But that might be something where it's just the case of, I can't do much here. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. We can't do everything. And if they say yes, then obviously you can say, so here's what I'm looking at, here's what I'm seeing, I hope this helps. But that's the key thing, is you don't want to say somebody should or shouldn't feel a certain way, but you can approach it from, hey, I understand that there are people out here that might not feel safe in their home going to work today, and this could be, how you post it initially to begin with. If this is helpful for you, here is what we're seeing. Here's what, the data is showing us and what we're predicting based on, the evidence and what we've got, if that's going to be helpful for you. It's not saying, hey, you shouldn't be afraid to go into work today. You shouldn't feel unsafe. It's saying, I hear you. I see you. I know that there are people out there who aren't. Here's what I can offer if this is helpful for you. And if not, that's okay. You are not the one-stop shop resource for all things, related to anxiety and fear. That might be where they call up our office. They call, again, a local therapist office and talk with them about. A lot of times, these things don't have simple, easy solutions that are just from one person. It's that old adage of it takes a village. Yeah. You get the facts from you come to somebody like me, you get the mental health stuff, and we work on that piece of it. You have those conversations with your significant other, and you start getting their support. And it's all of those things working together that helps. You might get there just utilizing one, but it might be slower. So identify those resources, identify what is the purpose of each resource, what is it going to help me with, what is its limitations, what can't it help me with, where do I get that from? And then, add those things in until you add that village that's helping you through it.
And that's a great point, because we're seeing that happen in the Storm Anxiety group. I'm up to 152 members in a month of people who joined just because they're uneasy about storms. And it started off, with me doing a lot of the talking, a lot of the posting when it's going to storm, and breaking it down even to street level for people, whatever they need at that moment. But now it's grown into a point where people are helping each other and people are talking each other through it. And now I have comment threads that are 9-10 people deep with people, resonating with that fear, and then some things they do, and then everyone's just talking collaboratively. And that's why I'm trying to build and expand that from, a little bit of self-help, a little bit to the science side, and then, like I said, eventually with everything going on with therapy and mental health side, if there's deeper rooted issues, to give them that option and that outlet right there, easily accessible to them, a little bit more than just, I guess, peer pressure or peer counseling, let's call it, can help. So we're seeing that happen a lot. All right, now for our final segment here, I want to talk about after the storm. During the storm, we're getting everyone to shelter. We're getting together. We feel safe. We talked ourselves off the ledge. We're in a good place now. Before the storm, we talked about how to prepare, how to get us to shelter. Now let's talk a little bit about after the storm. On both sides of the coin, I guess. You do all this preparing, you have all this anxiety, the storm comes, you get a few drops of rain, a rumble of thunder, and it's gone. What do you need to tell yourself going forward? Did you do everything the right way? I know you've explained it very well in the past couple of segments about doing what that person needs to do to feel safe at that time. Is that something that they should continue doing? Is there anything that they can tweak? Or is that something that, like you said, you may have to go to therapy over? Any insight on that when, you do all this preparing and then nothing happens?
Yeah. So, in that instance, that's going to happen. It's okay. You're not silly, you didn't do anything wrong, you took precautions, it turned out they weren't needed. That would be, I would compare it to, every time I get in my car, I put my seatbelt on because that's the safe thing to do. Most days, I don't get into an accident. So you could look at it from kind of that same mindset of, well, why did I put my seatbelt on? Nothing happened to me. I didn't need it. But we recognize, well, there's a high enough chance that something could, and if it does, that's going to be beneficial. So you treat it the same way. Realistically, anytime you're dealing with something that's going to cause anxiety, once that's passed, focus on self-care. Focus on doing things that help you feel better. So if it's a day that we're supposed to get some bad weather and that's something that you struggle with, queue up, your favorite movie, your favorite TV series, a favorite video game, a favorite book. Do things that you enjoy doing because, one, you're going to need that just time to decompress after you've been emotionally elevated for however long the weather event lasted or the whole day. But two, then that's going to start building some of those positive associations. That's kind of that idea that I talked about in the earlier segment about systematic desensitization. If I pair, hey, there was a storm, I made it through it, and I got, and I watched my favorite movie, I watched my favorite TV show, I got myself a treat from, Dairy Queen or Oberweis or something like that. I feel a little bit better. I feel good. That's going to gradually, over time, potentially lower some of that anxiety. It's not a magic bullet. It's not a cure-all. You're not going to do it once or twice and be like, I'm cured. I'm not worried about these things anymore. But those are things that are going to help. And they're just going to help you feel better. Taking care of your mental health is just as important as your physical health. We know things like depression and anxiety and high stress levels can have impacts on the immune system. They have impacts on our heart health and things like that. So taking care of that piece is really critical. If I go to the gym and I have a hard workout, I'm going to take care of myself by eating protein, getting water, maybe drinking Gatorade, things like that. I'm going to do the things that my body needs to heal and to be healthy and good and fulfilled after I'm done at the gym. It's the same way with mental health. So do the things that are going to take care of you, that are going to help you feel better, because it's going to be better for your overall mental health after these events happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that happens a lot. I mean, we talk about risk for severe weather, and then you literally have two sides of the fence every time we have a severe weather risk. You have the people that want bad storms and then get mad at you when they don't happen. And then you have the people that don't want bad storms
and then either feel so relieved to have such a coming down effect that it's almost like euphoria that they're safe, and then or you have the opposite approach on that where it's okay, well, the next time it's going to get me kind of thing. So we always see it when we deal with messaging in severe weather. But 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have what you expect is going to happen in your mind. And that's one of the biggest things that we wanted to get people to overcome, and how to try to cope with that. What would you suggest to people that may not have been directly impacted by severe weather, but a family member or a neighbor or a friend across town? Let's just say, heaven forbid, a tornado comes through and hits one half the town. It's not your half of the town, but it's, where your friends, your grandmother, your mom, or somebody lived, and now you're afraid severe weather is going to happen. Or is there some sort of tips or anything other than just preparing yourself, knowing when the watches and warnings are issued, but some things that you can do to make sure your loved ones are safe and that they're doing the right thing?
Yeah, I think in anything, when we recognize we're anxious about something and we know it's something that's going to happen, having plans, having things in place are always going to be things that help. It goes back to that idea of giving you a sense of control. Hey, I know I'm going to be anxious. I've got this plan. I'll be able to implement it. That's a good thing. That's a positive thing. Beyond that, when you're kind of getting exposed to what we call secondhand trauma, where you weren't directly impacted, but you saw something that was traumatic. We saw this a lot actually with 9/11, where a lot of people wound up with PTSD symptoms who weren't even in New York on that day, but they saw it on the news and it was traumatic and it was scary. And that can be really difficult because it didn't impact you directly. You weren't there, but it can give you that sense of, but this could happen. This could be something that I have to deal with. And that's, can be tricky because when something does happen, we know, okay, this is how I reacted to it. This is what, happened. This is what I was able to do. The hypothetical is almost worse because now you're trying to put yourself in that situation and going, if I was in that, situation, in that scenario, what would I do? How would I react? What would it feel like? And that's where a lot of guessing can come in. Sometimes what I've found to be helpful with people is think about your life and what you've already made it through. Most of us have experienced something that was really impactful, potentially traumatic, difficult, etc. Think about talking to yourself before that event happened and saying, hey, within the next year, within the next 5 years, this is what's going to happen in your life. For most of us who have been through that difficult thing, we go, I don't know how I'd survive that. I don't know how I would get through that, or how I would be happy. I talk about this sometimes with people who've been divorced. If you told somebody ahead of time, this is what's going to happen, oh my gosh, I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't love somebody again. I don't know if I'd ever be able to move on. And I'm talking to them after the fact, and they're in these relationships. Mm-hmm. They've made it through. They've made it past. And so really having that as something to fall back on of recognizing, hey, I have survived things. I've made it through things that in the past would have seemed insurmountable, but I did it. And so holding on to that and recognizing, okay, it might be difficult if I find myself in that really bad storm, but I've gotten through really difficult things before, and I have confidence that I can do it again. It's, that time in that instance, it's about self-confidence. It's about trusting yourself that no matter how bad it is, you'll be able to get through it. You'll be able to conquer it. You'll be able to move past it. And that can be a huge, huge piece when it comes to anticipatory anxiety, or thinking about things that you haven't had to deal with.
So, along the lines of what you're saying, is it a thing to feel anxious for somebody, or is it more along the lines of, as you just said a couple minutes ago, I'm just anxious because I'm putting myself in their shoes?
Could be a little bit of both. Yeah, you can feel anxious for somebody. Like if I know that somebody's going to go through something that's really difficult, I can have a little bit of anxiety of, oh, I don't know how they're going to get through that. But, if you're finding that's the case, going back to that trusting, if there's something I'm able to do, I talk to that person, hey, what do you need? Do you need anything? If they say no, trusting, okay, I can be anxious about this for them on their behalf, but they're trusting themselves. I'm going to trust them.
Excellent. No, I see that a lot, especially, with parents that have children. It's, the kid's anxious, they're anxious. The kid, maybe not anxiety through the child, but protecting the child. Feeling like they would be a failure if something happened to the child, even though they did everything right. I know that happens a lot, and I know a couple of people specifically that were never afraid of storms, never anxious about it, but the second they had kids, now they're asking about weather because it may not be so much, well, I'm not worried about myself, I'm worried about protecting my kids. Is this the best structure? For me, I don't know how to explain that, whether it is just the nurturing aspect of this is my nest, I want to protect my nest, and when I was the lone bird flying away, whatever, I don't care what happens, but now I have people to protect. Or was it always deep rooted that they were also afraid, but now they have somebody to basically sympathize with them? Now it's my kids and I journey together kind of thing.
Yeah, and there could be different layers to that. It could be that there was a low-grade anxiety that was always present, but if you're living alone, you don't have anybody necessarily to worry about, there's nobody else that's going to be impacted by it. So it's kind of just your anxiety that, you deal with. And for a lot of times, people with anxiety will find ways to deal with some of those common anxiety sources. Some helpful and healthy, some not so much, but we know how to get through it. Now you've got a family, you've got, kids, and they're anxious, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's not just me here anymore. I've got to protect them. And so sometimes it can be that commiserating effect. Sometimes we project that anxiety onto them. Going back to, kind of my running theme is we need to understand where that anxiety is coming from, why it's there, why don't I feel safe in this moment, and what's going to help me feel safer. Is there anything I can do? If you're a parent who has some storm anxiety and your kid's at school, what can you do? Well, going and picking them up may not be the best idea, especially if the storm's about to hit.
Yeah.
So it's going to be trusting that the school knows what to do, that the teachers and staff are well trained. And if you're trying to do that and that's still something difficult, that might be something to talk to a therapist about, talk to a loved one about. Because again, it's not always about facts. It's about, what's going to help you feel safer. But when it comes to other people, our sphere of control and our sphere of influence is naturally limited. I can only control me. I can't control somebody else.
Sure. No, that's an excellent point, Zach. I appreciate your insight on that. I guess a couple more questions I had, especially after the storm. We get the people that are negatively impacted by severe weather, and they have a wide range of emotions. And we've really talked about the fear side of things and driving away and trying to bury themselves and whatever to try to avoid that fear. What about the opposite end of that, of the fear spectrum, where they freeze and do nothing because they just want to blurt it out of their head? They don't want to think about it. They're ignoring everything. So now we have a situation where there's really bad weather coming, and that person is like, I don't want to see social media. I don't want to see anything tornadoes. I'm turning my weather radio off. I'm not watching the news. I'm just going to sit here and ignore everything's happening. Obviously, maybe that's their coping mechanism and it makes them feel better in the moment. But from my side of things in the physical science, it's like you're putting yourself in a lot more danger ignoring weather warnings until it's too late, and then you don't know how to act. And even if you recognize the signs that severe weather is about to do something potentially harmful to you, it's too late and you may still ignore that. I know there's a famous video from about 10 years ago in Fairdale, Illinois, where a husband, he's in his 80s, is filming a very large tornado. It was an EF4 tornado moving towards him from the second floor of his home, and literally filmed it hitting him. He got tossed. He was fine, but his wife, who did everything right, in the bathtub, lowest level of the home, ended up passing away. So, in that sense, this guy, I don't know, I can't speak for him or anything, but did he freeze because of fear? Did he freeze because he was in awe of shock? Did he not think it was going to hit him? But it's that angle that I want to focus on because, you know, I don't want to generalize, but it seems like in all of my dealings, the women that I deal with are very open about their fear about severe weather and very vocal about they're afraid, they're anxious, they don't want it to happen, they need to know everything about it. And it's the men that are either the ones that are saying, yeah, bring it on, and maybe they do want it, but maybe that's just a facade into, yeah, bring it on, but they're like, oh boy, I really hope it doesn't hit me kind of thing. So I guess my question to you is, how would you address and talk to people who think the best coping mechanism is to avoid it? And it's not like we said before, you can't avoid the weather. The weather's going to do what the weather does. It's not like you're afraid of, snakes, so you don't go to the jungle, you don't go on tall grass or something like that. You can avoid that completely. But the weather you can't do. So what would be your advice for that?
Yeah, so, avoidance is different from freeze. So freeze is a natural response to danger. It's not something that we have much, if any, control over. It's, one of those things where some people in those stressful situations freeze. That's the natural response. There's nothing they could have done about that. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, and that's something that we can help people process and whatnot afterwards. Avoidance, though, that's more of a conscious choice. That's, that case of, I know this makes me anxious, so I'm just going to avoid everything, not look at it, shut my weather radio up. That's choosing to avoid. There can be instances where select avoidance is good. I mentioned COVID in one of my earlier responses, and that was a big thing I talked about with people of, hey, turn the news off. Find your trusted news source, check it in the morning, check it at night, don't look at it throughout the day. Technically, that's avoidance, but it's, more strategic and beneficial in that sense. So for that person, I would look at, what are they potentially doing along with the avoidance? If somebody's living alone in a house and they're like, I'm not going to look at social media, I'm going to turn my weather radio off, but I'm going to go sleep downstairs in the basement. All right, fair. There might be a couple of things you could do to maybe better protect yourself in the basement, but you've taken precautions, you've done that. Now, if you're like, no, I'm just going to do that, and just kind of be in the second floor of my house and go to bed and hope everything turns out fine. We might want to touch on that and be like, okay, I understand in part why you're avoiding, because you don't want to make the anxiety worse. How are you going to know if something is unsafe and what you need to do? But it goes back to that idea of I can only control me. I can't control other people. And if that person's like, nope, I recognize all the risks, I recognize all the dangers, that's still what I want to do. It's like, okay, I've explained the risks, I've told you what the dangers are, this is still what you want to do, I guess that's your call. Unfortunately, we can't make people do the things that are going to keep them safe, and there's always going to be people who choose the risk or to choose to potentially put themselves in danger, and you do what you can, but then recognize that you are limited.
Sure, absolutely. And like I said, we see that a lot, whether people admit it or not. I mean, not to throw her under the bus, but my own wife is kind of that way, where she's just of the intention that, you know what, something's going to happen, it's going to happen. But it's like, well, I get that, but there's steps you could take to prevent some things from happening. But that may just be the indifference of, that's not going to happen to me, which is a whole nother can of worms that we'll get into in a different segment. But I guess finally, we'll just wrap it up with, is there anything that you can just advise somebody to do on a day-to-day basis just to get over generalized anxiety? I know you kind of went over it in the beginning of how the breathing techniques and different things you can do at that point to realize you're going to have a panic attack. And once you're in one, we obviously know, I'm sure a lot of people know exactly what that feels like. I do specifically, and it feels like it's the end to me. Whenever I had a panic attack before, I thought that was it. I couldn't breathe. I was losing vision. I thought the world was crumbling down upon me. There is no coming out of this. And then it got better after, whatever interventions needed to be done at that point. But I guess my final question to you is, we are in severe weather season here in Illinois. That can happen year-round, but we're in the peak season right now. Is there anything that you can advise people, or an outlet to reach out to, or anything if they need better help and better coping mechanisms?
Always, if you're struggling with anxiety, you're struggling with depression, you're just struggling with general life stress, going and talking to a therapist can be really important. It's changing the beliefs and attitudes, but there are still some people out there who are like, well, I'm not quote unquote crazy. I don't have severe mental illness, so I don't need to go to therapy. But a lot of times, people who I see in therapy aren't, severely depressed or, have really serious anxiety. It's sometimes people who are just struggling a little bit to get through something. And, stress, anxiety, it's all a natural part of life. I look at it like this. So my stress limit is like this glass. Let's say this is the most stress that I can handle. Right now, it's empty. So I can take on however much I can fill up this glass. But let's say the glass is about half full, and I take this can and I pour into it. If it's a full can, what's going to happen? The stress is going to overflow the lip of the glass, and that's when people tend to have those anxiety attacks, those breakdowns, they're feeling overwhelmed. So it's always good to take inventory of, how full is my glass? My glass might only be a quarter full, but are there things I can do to lower it? Because what if something that would be a full glass's worth of stress comes along and pours in? No, that's always a risk. That can always happen. We can't always, kind of like the weather, we can't always predict it and have the best route through it. But taking that inventory, doing the things to minimize stress, to minimize anxiety on a day-to-day basis, practicing that self-care that I mentioned, those are all good things that in general are going to help keep that cup from being too full.
Yeah.
And then we deal with the consequences of that. So that's probably the best thing that I would say to do.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that, and hopefully a lot of people will understand and begin some of those things. And like I said, if you need help doing it, we have your service. They can sign up for, right? It's Owens Consult.
Yeah, Owens and Associates Counseling. We have the offices, like I said, Collinsville, St. Charles, Schaumburg, Lake in the Hills. But we also offer, virtual sessions. I've worked with, clients across the state of Illinois, from all parts of it. And we've just done virtual sessions. So our admin office is always ready to, pair people up with a clinician. We don't have any waiting times or waiting periods currently, for it to get in with a therapist. For a specific therapist, you might have one. I don't know everybody's schedule, but in general, we do a really good job of getting people in within a week of your first call. So obviously, we're just one option. There's going to be options, as well that you can look at, but those are some really, good resources and things like that. And I know, Danny is going to have the links to our websites and everything like that. So if you wanted to go that route, feel free to, pull up our website, read through some bios, and give us a call.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'm happy that we were able to strike this sort of partnership here and helping each other out and helping, more importantly, our followers and people out who are afraid of storms. Like I said, I could talk fact-finding, physical science all day till I'm blue in the face, but that's sometimes not enough. So being able to talk to somebody additional to me that will approach it from a different angle is exactly why I wanted this to happen. And I'm very grateful that you decided to go into this, and your Owens Associates, Shannon and everyone else, decided to give this a shot and see what we can do about it. Because, like I said, we really want to just start helping people. And, I definitely advocate going to Owens Consulting and signing up and talking to Zach or somebody else that can help you in a way that I can't do that. And, don't be afraid, whether man, woman, or child, to speak up about your anxiety, especially about severe weather, but just in general day-to-day life. So, as Zach has said many times in this interview, that we all feature different sort of anxiety about different sort of subjects and different sort of levels of anxiety. So even if you're very low level anxious, doesn't mean you still can't reach out to try to think of ways so it doesn't stair step and build on you. So anything else, Zach? Any other comments, concerns, or questions?
No, I think that about covers it from me. Wherever you find yourself watching this, whatever day it goes up, whatever's going on, remember, do that self-care. Take a little bit of time for yourself, because you deserve it. And if you're thinking, well, other people have it worse than me, what I always say is, if a person is drowning, it doesn't matter if they're drowning in a puddle or if they're drowning in an ocean. If nobody's around, they're still drowning. So even if you're seeing your situation and going, but it only is a puddle, it feels like it's only a puddle, I help people out of puddles. And if it's an ocean, we can help you out of the ocean too. It doesn't matter to us which way it is. You deserve it. You're worth it. And you matter. Your health matters.
Awesome. Those are great words, Zach. I appreciate it. And I echo those sentiments. And everyone that has watched this, stay tuned. We have a lot more content coming your way. Some panelist discussions, some one-on-one interviews with different experts, and even some group therapy if we get to that point. We can do whatever we need to do. So thank you guys. Hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for episode 2 coming up soon.